Maria Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she flipped another batch of corn tortillas on the hot griddle. The small taco cart on the corner of 5th and Main had been her daily station for 3 years now, and every morning she arrived at 5:30 sharp to begin preparations. The aroma of seasoned beef, fresh cilantro, and lime filled the air around her modest setup. Her husband, Carlos, would drop her off each morning on his way to the construction site, giving her a quick kiss and reminding her to save some tacos for his lunch. He worked hard laying bricks and mixing cement, his hands rough and calloused from years of honest labor. Maria watched him drive away in their old pickup truck, the same vehicle they had bought used 5 years ago when they first got married. "Good morning, Maria," called out Mrs. Patterson, one of her regular customers who worked at the bank across the street. "The usual, please." Maria smiled warmly and began assembling 2 chicken tacos with extra salsa verde. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, adding just the right amount of each ingredient. This was her world now, at least the world that everyone could see. The simple life of a hard-working woman trying to make ends meet alongside her construction worker husband. But as Maria handed over the tacos and accepted the crumpled $5 bill, her mind wandered to the phone calls she would need to make. Later that afternoon, there were board meetings to attend via video conference, investment portfolios to review, and merger documents to approve. The small smartphone tucked discreetly in her apron pocket would buzz throughout the day with urgent messages from lawyers, accountants, and executives who knew her by a completely different name, Sarah Mitchell. That was the name on her business cards, the name that appeared on the Forbes list of youngest billionaires, the name that commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents. But here, standing behind a taco cart with sauce-stained apron and flour-dusted hands, she was simply Maria Rodriguez, devoted wife and small business owner. The deception had started innocently enough. When she met Carlos at a community festival 4 years ago, she had been taking a rare day off from her corporate responsibilities. Dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt, no makeup, hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, she had been enjoying the anonymity of blending in with regular people. Carlos had approached her with genuine interest, not because of her wealth or status, but because he found her laugh infectious and her smile captivating. For the first time in her adult life, someone loved her for who she was as a person, not what she could provide or what connections she could make. Carlos would bring her wildflowers he picked on construction sites and tell her stories about his childhood in Mexico. He treated her like she was precious, but not because she was rich. He had no idea that the woman he fell in love with owned the very construction company that employed him. As more customers approached her cart, Maria slipped back into her role. She chatted with the office workers about the weather, asked about their families, and remembered everyone's preferred level of spiciness. This part of her life had become surprisingly fulfilling. There was something deeply satisfying about providing people with good food made with care and attention. "Maria, you make the best tacos in the whole city," said Tommy, a teenager who stopped by every day after school. "My mom wants to know if you cater parties." "Tell your mother I would be happy to discuss it with her," Maria replied, handing him his usual order of 3 beef tacos with mild salsa. She had learned to genuinely care about these people who had become part of her daily routine. The lunch rush kept her busy until nearly 2 o'clock. As the crowd thinned, Maria began cleaning her equipment and preparing to close for the day. This was when her other life would begin. She had learned to compartmentalize her existence into these distinct phases, switching between identities as easily as changing clothes. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Board meeting moved to 3 p.m., Japanese investors arriving early." Maria typed back quickly, "We'll be there." She always made her meetings, even if it meant rushing from the taco cart to a conference room full of executives in expensive suits. Carlos would pick her up at 3:30, believing she was finished with work for the day. He would ask about her sales, worry about whether she was making enough money, and suggest ways to attract more customers. His concern for their financial future was both touching and heartbreaking. If only he knew that. She could buy the entire city block where her taco cart sat. But how could she tell him now? How could she explain that she had been living a lie since the day they met? Carlos took pride in being the provider, in working hard to support his wife's small business. He had even taken a second job on weekends to help her save money for a bigger cart, or maybe even a small restaurant someday. The truth would shatter everything he believed about their relationship and about himself. It would make him question every moment they had shared, every plan they had made together. Maria had convinced herself that the deception was an act of love, a way to protect the pure connection they had found together. As she packed away the last of her supplies, Maria caught her reflection in the chrome surface of her cart. Two different. Women stared back at her from that distorted mirror. One was the billionaire CEO who commanded corporate empires from glass towers. The other was the taco vendor who found joy in serving her community and love in her husband's embrace. She had built a fortune by making difficult decisions, but this personal dilemma seemed impossible to solve. Every day the secret grew heavier, and every night she lay awake wondering how long she could maintain this double life. Carlos deserved honesty, but the truth seemed too dangerous to risk. Maria locked her cart and walked to the corner where Carlos would pick her up, preparing to slip back into the role of devoted wife for another evening. She had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to face its biggest challenge yet. Carlos arrived right on schedule, his work clothes dusty and his face tired but brightening the moment he saw Maria waiting on the corner. She climbed into the passenger seat of their old pickup truck and gave him a kiss on the cheek, tasting the salt of honest sweat and feeling the roughness of his unshaven jaw. "How was business today, mi amor?" he asked, pulling into traffic with the careful attention of someone who could not afford car repairs. The radio played softly in Spanish, and Maria found comfort in these simple moments that felt so real compared to the corporate theater she performed in conference rooms. "Good day," she replied, settling into the worn fabric seat. "Mrs. Patterson bought lunch for her whole office again, and the construction crew from the downtown project stopped by. Tommy's mother wants to discuss catering her son's birthday party." Carlos beamed with pride. "See? I told you this business would grow. Soon you will need a bigger cart, maybe even hire someone to help you." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "We make a good team, you and me. My construction money and your taco money. Together we will build something beautiful." Maria's heart clenched at his words. If only he knew that she could buy him his own construction company, could set him up with projects worth millions of dollars. But she also knew that Carlos would never accept charity, even from his wife. His pride was both one of the things she loved most about him and the biggest obstacle to honesty in their marriage. They drove through their neighborhood, past the small houses with chain-link fences and carefully tended gardens. Carlos pointed out different properties, sharing his dreams of someday buying them a little house with a yard where Maria could grow herbs for her cooking. He had already started saving money in a coffee can under their bed, adding his extra dollars whenever he could. "Maybe in 5 years," he said optimistically, "if we both keep working hard and save every penny we can spare." Maria nodded and smiled, knowing she could buy that house tomorrow with what she spent on lunch at business meetings. The guilt was becoming harder to bear, but so was the fear of losing this precious normalcy they had built together. Their apartment was a modest 2-bedroom unit in a building that had seen better decades. The furniture was second-hand but clean, decorated with photographs of their wedding and small gifts they had given each other over the years. Carlos had painted the walls himself, and Maria had sewn curtains from fabric she found on sale. It was the kind of home that love had made beautiful despite its limitations. "I need to make some phone calls for supplies," Maria said once they were inside. This was her usual excuse for the afternoon conference calls that kept her connected to her business empire. Carlos never questioned it. trusting that she was working hard to make their modest life successful. She retreated to their bedroom and closed the door, then pulled out the smartphone that contained her real identity. Within minutes, she was connected to a video conference with executives in New York, discussing the acquisition of a hotel chain worth more than most countries' annual budgets. "Sarah, the Japanese investors are concerned about the timeline," said her chief financial officer, a sharp woman in an expensive suit sitting in a conference room 50 floors above Manhattan. "They want assurances that we can close by the end of the quarter." Maria, still wearing her taco-stained apron, leaned closer to the phone's camera. "Tell them we've never missed a deadline. The regulatory approvals are already in process, and our legal team has cleared every potential obstacle. This deal will happen exactly as promised." For the next hour, she navigated complex negotiations involving hundreds of millions of dollars, while listening to Carlos move around their small kitchen, preparing dinner with ingredients they had carefully budgeted for at the grocery store. The contrast between her two worlds had never felt sharper. When the call ended, Maria quickly changed clothes and joined Carlos in the kitchen. He had made rice with beans and chicken, the same meal they ate twice a week because it was filling and affordable. He served her with the same care he would show a queen, and she ate with genuine appreciation for both the food and the love behind it. "Carlos," she said carefully, "what if we had more money? What would you want to do differently?" He looked up from his plate, considering the question seriously. "I do not dream of being rich, Maria. Rich people, they have problems we cannot imagine. They do not know who really loves them and who loves their money. They cannot trust anyone completely." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I prefer our life. We work hard, we have enough, and we know our love is real." His words hit Maria like a physical blow. Everything he said revealed exactly why she could never tell him the truth. Carlos had built his entire sense of self around the idea that their love was pure because it was not contaminated by wealth or status. The revelation that his wife was one of the richest people in the world would destroy not just their relationship, but his fundamental beliefs about human nature and authentic connection. After dinner, they sat together on their small couch, watching a telenovela on their old television. Carlos wrapped his arms around Maria, and she felt safer in that embrace than she ever did in her corporate boardrooms surrounded by security teams. This was the life she had never known she wanted until she found it by accident. "I have been thinking," Carlos said during a commercial break. "Maybe next year we can take a vacation. Nothing expensive, just a few days at the beach. We could save up for it if we are careful." Maria imagined Carlos's face if he knew she owned beachfront resorts in 12 different countries. Instead, she snuggled closer to him and said, "That sounds wonderful. I would love to see the ocean with you." Later that night, as Carlos slept, peacefully beside her, Maria stared at the ceiling and wrestled with her conscience. Every day that passed made the deception more elaborate and the eventual revelation more devastating. She had created a house of cards that would collapse the moment Carlos learned the truth about who she really was. But she also could not imagine giving up either life. The corporate world gave her a sense of accomplishment and power that was addictive in its own way. The simple life with Carlos gave her something she had never experienced before: genuine love and authentic human connection. Maria closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of living this impossible double life, hoping that somehow she could find a way to keep both worlds spinning without destroying the man she loved more than all her billions combined. 3 weeks later, Maria's carefully balanced world began to show its first cracks. It started with something as simple as a newspaper left behind by a customer at her taco cart. The business section was folded open to an article about corporate mergers, and there, smiling from a black and white photograph, was her face above the headline, "Tech mogul Sarah Mitchell closes billion-dollar deal." Maria quickly grabbed the newspaper and shoved it into her trash bag, looking around nervously to see if anyone had noticed. Her heart pounded as she realized how close she had come to exposure. In her corporate world, she was increasingly visible as her company grew larger and more successful. Avoiding cameras and publicity was becoming nearly impossible. That afternoon, during her usual phone conference, her publicist delivered troubling news. "Sarah, Forbes wants to do a feature story on you for their cover. They're calling it The Invisible Billionaire because you've managed to stay out of the spotlight for so long. The photographer wants to schedule a shoot next week." "Absolutely not," Maria said firmly, keeping her voice low so Carlos would not hear from the next room. "No interviews, no photographs, no features. That is my policy, and it has not changed." "But, Sarah, this kind of publicity could be worth hundreds of millions in additional business opportunities. Your competitors are getting all the media attention while you remain hidden." Maria ended the call without another word. She could not risk the kind of exposure that would make her face recognizable to anyone who read magazines or newspapers. Carlos occasionally picked up publications at the grocery store, and their neighbors watched the business news on television. One wrong photograph could destroy everything. But the universe seemed determined to test her resolve. 2 days later, while she was serving lunch to the usual crowd, a man in an expensive suit approached her cart. He looked out of place in the neighborhood, and something about his confident manner made Maria immediately suspicious. "Excuse me," he said in a smooth voice that carried authority. "I am looking for someone who might work in this area. A woman named Sarah Mitchell. I have reason to believe she frequents this neighborhood." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she continued preparing tacos, but she kept her voice steady. "I do not know anyone by that name, sir. Would you like to order something?" The man studied her face carefully, and Maria felt exposed under his scrutiny. "She is about your height, similar build, dark hair. Very successful businesswoman, but she seems to have disappeared from her usual haunts. There is quite a lot of money involved in finding her." "There are many women in this neighborhood," Maria replied, focusing intently on her work. "Perhaps you should try the businesses down the street." After the man left without ordering anything, Maria spent the rest of the day looking over her shoulder. She recognized him now as a private investigator her competitors had hired before to dig up information about her business practices. Someone was actively searching for Sarah Mitchell, and they were getting closer to finding her. That evening, Carlos noticed her distraction immediately. "You seem worried, mi amor. Did something happen at work today?" Maria forced a smile. "Just thinking about expanding the business. Sometimes change makes me nervous." Carlos sat beside her on the couch and pulled her close. "Change can be good. Remember when you first told me about wanting to start the taco cart? I was scared too. We did not have much money, and I worried you would fail and blame me for not stopping you." "You were scared?" Maria asked, surprised. Carlos always seemed so confident in his support of her business. "Terrified," he admitted with a laugh. "But I learned that sometimes the things that scare us most are the things we need to do. Maybe expanding your business is scary because it matters so much to you." His words hit deeper than he could know. The thing that scared Maria most was not expanding her business, but revealing it. Yet perhaps Carlos was right that the things they fear most are sometimes exactly what they need to do. The next morning brought a crisis that made her personal dilemma seem suddenly smaller. Carlos did not come home from work at his usual time. When 6 o'clock passed, then 7, then 8, Maria began to panic. He always called if he was going to be late, always kept her informed of his whereabouts. At 9:30, her phone finally rang. But it was not Carlos calling. It was his foreman from the construction site. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Miguel Santos. I work with your husband. There has been an accident." Maria's world stopped spinning. "What kind of accident? Is he okay?" "He fell from some scaffolding. He is alive, but he is hurt badly. They took him to General Hospital. You should come right Away. Maria hung up and ran outside to catch a taxi, her mind racing with terror and possibilities. During the longest 20-minute ride of her life, she realized that nothing else mattered except Carlos being okay. Not her secret identity, not her business empire, not the complex web of lies she had built around their relationship. At the hospital, she found Carlos unconscious in intensive care, connected to machines that monitored his vital signs. The doctor explained that he had suffered a serious head injury and internal bleeding. The next 24 hours would be critical. "We are going to do everything we can," the doctor assured her. "But I want you to understand that his injuries are severe. The surgery will be expensive, and even with insurance, there will be significant costs." "Money is not an issue," Maria said immediately. "Do whatever he needs. Use the best specialists, the most advanced equipment, whatever it takes." The doctor looked surprised. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I want to make sure you understand. We are talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical expenses. I understand perfectly. Save my husband." As she sat beside Carlos's hospital bed through that endless night, holding his hand and listening to the rhythm of machines keeping him alive, Maria made a decision that had been years in the making. Carlos needed the best medical care available, and she was going to make sure he got it, regardless of what questions it might raise. When morning came and the specialists began arriving to consult on his case, Maria started making phone calls, not to her business associates or board members, but to the most renowned neurosurgeons and trauma specialists money could attract. Within hours, Carlos had a medical team that normally treated heads of state and celebrities. "How were you able to arrange all this?" asked Miguel, Carlos's foreman, who had come to check on his friend. "These doctors, they do not usually come to this hospital." Maria looked at Carlos's peaceful face and made another decision. The time for partial truths was over. "Because I can afford them," she said simply. "And Carlos deserves the best chance at recovery." She had crossed a line that would change everything, but as she watched her husband fight for his life, Maria realized that some risks were worth taking. Love was worth any amount of truth, no matter how difficult that truth might be to accept. Carlos woke up 3 days later to find his wife sitting beside his hospital bed. But something was different about her. The worry lines around her eyes were deeper, and there was a tension in her posture that he had never seen before. More confusing. Still were the flowers filling his room from people and companies he had never heard of, and the constant stream of specialists checking his condition. "Maria," he said weakly, his voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed that morning. "What happened? Where am I?" Relief flooded her face as she leaned forward to take his hand. "You are in the hospital, mi amor. You fell at the construction site. But you are going to be okay. The doctors say you are healing well." Carlos tried to sit up, but felt dizzy immediately. "The doctors. They are very fancy doctors. And this room, it is too nice for our insurance. Maria, how much is this going to cost us?" The question she had been dreading. Maria had hoped to have more time before addressing the financial realities of his treatment, but Carlos was too observant and too practical to ignore what was happening around him. "Do not worry about money right now," she said gently. "Just focus on getting better." But Carlos was not satisfied with that answer. Over the following days, as his strength returned, he began noticing more details that did not make sense. The TASE nurses treated Maria with unusual deference, often asking if she needed anything or if there was some way they could make her more comfortable. The head of surgery stopped by personally each morning to check on his progress. Most puzzling of all, his room had been upgraded to a private suite in the hospital's executive wing. "Maria, I need you to tell me the truth," he said on his 5th day in the hospital. "Our insurance does not cover this kind of treatment. My foreman Miguel says these doctors flew in from other cities just to work on my case. How is this possible?" Maria had been preparing for this conversation. But now that The moment had arrived. She felt terrified. Carlos, there are things about our situation that I have not told you, things that are complicated to explain. What kind of things? His voice was cautious now, and she could see the worry in his eyes. Before she could answer, there was a knock at the door. A woman in an expensive suit entered carrying a briefcase and tablets. Mrs. Mitchell, I have the documents you requested. Carlos stared at his wife in confusion. Mrs. Mitchell? Who is Mrs. Mitchell? The woman looked embarrassed. I apologize. I thought, should I come back later? No, Maria said, her heart pounding. Carlos, this is my lawyer, Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer, this is my husband, Carlos Rodriguez. Your husband? Jennifer looked genuinely shocked. In all her years representing Sarah Mitchell, she had never heard mention of a husband, much less met him. After Jennifer left with promises to return later, Carlos sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Who are you, Maria? What is happening here? Maria took a deep breath and began the most difficult conversation of her life. My real name is Sarah Mitchell. I own a technology company, several other businesses. I am wealthy, Carlos. Very wealthy. How wealthy? He asked, though his tone suggested he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Wealthy enough that money will never be a concern for us. Wealthy enough to afford the best medical care in the world. Wealthy enough to buy this entire hospital if it would help you get better. Carlos closed his eyes and was quiet for a long time. When he opened them again, Maria saw a mixture of hurt, confusion, and something that looked like betrayal. How long have you been lying to me? Since the day we met, she admitted. But Carlos, please understand that I never meant to hurt you. When we first started dating, I planned to tell you the truth right away. But then I realized that you loved me for who I am as a person, not because of what I own or what I could give you. So you decided to lie to me instead. For years, Maria. Every day, every conversation, every time I worried about money or talked about our future, you were lying. The pain in his voice was worse than any physical injury she could have imagined. I was protecting what we had. You said it yourself, that rich people cannot trust if love is real. I wanted to keep our love pure. Carlos laughed bitterly. Pure? There is nothing pure about building a marriage on lies, Maria. Or Sarah. I do not even know what to call you anymore. I am still the same person who makes your breakfast every morning, who listens to your stories about work, who loves you more than anything else in this world. Are you? Carlos asked. Because the woman I married runs a taco cart and worries about paying rent. The woman I married dreams about saving enough money to buy a little house with a garden. The woman I married shares my struggles and my hopes for our future. I do share your hopes, Maria said desperately. I love our life together, Carlos. I love the simplicity of it, the authenticity of it. That is why I kept working at the taco cart, even though I did not need the money. You kept working at the taco cart because it was part of your lie, Carlos said, his voice growing stronger with anger. You turned our entire relationship into some kind of game or experiment. You wanted to see how the poor people live, and I was your entertainment. That is not true. And you know it, Maria said, tears streaming down her face. I fell in love with you completely. Everything about our life together has been real for me. Real? Carlos struggled to sit up straighter in his hospital bed. Real? Would have been trusting me with the truth. Real would have been letting me make an informed choice about who I was marrying. Instead, you made that choice for me. Maria reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. Carlos, please. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. We can work through this. How can we work through this, Maria? Every memory I have of our relationship is tainted now. Every time I worked extra hours to help support your business, every time I felt proud of providing for my wife, every time I made sacrifices so we could save money together, all of it was based on a lie. The silence that followed was broken, only by the beeping of medical equipment. Maria had never felt more alone, despite being in the same room with the person she loved most in the world. "I need time to think," Carlos said finally. "I need to understand who you really are and what this means for us. Right now, I feel like I do not know you at all." "I am still me," Maria whispered. "Under all the complexity and the money and the business empire, I am still the woman who fell in love with a kind, honest man who brought me wildflowers and made me laugh." Carlos looked at her with sad eyes. "Maybe you are. But how would I know the difference between the real you and another? Performance, how can I ever trust my own judgment about you again?" As visiting hours ended and Maria prepared to leave for the night, she realized that saving Carlos's life might have cost her their marriage. The money that could solve any problem in the business world seemed powerless to repair the damage her deception had caused to the most important relationship in her life. 2 weeks passed with Carlos refusing to see Maria outside of brief, formal visits during his recovery. He spoke only about medical matters and practical arrangements, treating her like a helpful stranger rather than his wife. The warmth and intimacy they had shared seemed to have vanished completely, replaced by polite distance that hurt more than any argument. During this painful period, Maria found herself questioning everything about her choices and her identity. She stopped going to the taco cart, unable to maintain the pretense when her marriage was falling apart. Her corporate responsibilities demanded attention, but she moved through board meetings and conference calls like a ghost, making decisions automatically, while her heart remained focused on the man who no longer trusted her. Carlos was discharged from the hospital on a Tuesday morning. Maria had arranged for a private car to take him home, along with a full-time nurse to help with his recovery. She waited anxiously at their apartment, hoping that being back in their shared space might help them reconnect. But when Carlos walked through the door, supported by the nurse, he looked around their modest home as if seeing it for the first time. Every simple thing they had chosen together now seemed to mock the foundation of lies their relationship had been built on. "The nurse can use the spare bedroom," he said without looking at Maria. It was the longest sentence he had spoken to her in days. "Carlos, please, can we talk? Really talk about what happened and what we need to do to fix this?" He sat heavily on their second-hand couch, the same couch where they had dreamed about their future together countless times. "What is there to talk about, Maria? You have been pretending to be someone else for our entire relationship. I do not even know where to begin untangling what was real and what was performance." "Everything about my feelings for you was real," she said, sitting across from him. "Every laugh we shared, every quiet morning, every plan we made together, my love for you has been the most honest thing in my life." "But you built that love on dishonesty," Carlos replied. "How do I separate your feelings from your lies? When you worried about money with me, was that real concern or just playing a role? When you worked long hours at the taco cart, were you actually committed to our business or just maintaining your cover story?" Maria struggled to answer because she was no longer certain herself. The line between Sarah Mitchell and Maria Rodriguez had blurred so completely over the years that she could not always distinguish between her authentic self and the character she had created. "I think," she said slowly, "that Maria Rodriguez became real because of you. When I started pretending to be a simple woman with simple dreams, I discovered parts of myself that I had never known existed. The woman who enjoyed making tacos for people, who found satisfaction in honest work, who could be happy with a modest life. That woman was born from loving you." Carlos studied her face, looking for signs of truth or deception. "So which woman am I married to? The billionaire CEO or the taco vendor?" "Both," Maria said. "Neither. I do not know anymore, Carlos. What I know is that I love you enough to give up everything else if that is what it takes to save our marriage. Give up everything else? You mean your business empire? If that is what you need from me, yes. I could liquidate my assets, donate the money to charity, become the simple woman you thought you married. Carlos shook his head. That would just be another lie, Maria. You cannot erase who you are to make me comfortable. And I would never ask you to destroy something you built with your own intelligence and hard work. Then what can I do? Maria asked desperately. Tell me how to fix this. I do not know if it can be fixed, Carlos said quietly. Every day I think about our relationship, I discover new layers of deception. Yesterday I realized that the construction company I work for is probably one of your businesses. Is it? Maria's silence was answer enough. So even my job is part of your lie, Carlos continued. Even my sense of pride in providing for our family is based on your manipulation. I never interfered with your work, Maria protested. You earned your position and your respect from your colleagues through your own skills and dedication. But you could have interfered. You could have promoted me or given me easier assignments or made sure I never faced any real challenges. How do I know? You did not? The questions multiplied endlessly, and each one revealed new ways that Maria's deception had infected every aspect of their shared life. Carlos felt like he was living in a house of mirrors where nothing appeared to be what it seemed. Carlos, Maria said after a long silence, what if we started over? What if we tried to build something new, something honest, based on who we really are now? Who are we really? Carlos asked. I thought I was a construction worker married to a taco vendor. I thought we were two working-class people building a life together through mutual effort and sacrifice. Now I discover that I am actually a construction worker married to a billionaire who has been studying me like a laboratory experiment. It was never an experiment, Maria said firmly. You were never a subject to be studied. You were the man I fell in love with, the man who made me want to be a better person. Better person? Carlos laughed bitterly. You became a more dishonest person. You became someone who could lie to her husband every single day for years without showing any sign of guilt or remorse. I showed plenty of guilt and remorse. I just hid it from you, the same way I hid everything else. Carlos stood up slowly, still weak from his injuries. I need to stay somewhere else for a while. I need space to think about who I am and what I want from my life. Where will you go? Maria asked, panic rising in her voice. My brother has a spare room. I will stay there until I figure out what comes next. What about us? What about our marriage? Carlos paused at the door and looked back at her with sad eyes. I do not know, Maria. I do not know if there is an us anymore, or if there ever really was. After he left, Maria sat alone in their apartment, surrounded by the simple things they had chosen together. Every item told a story of their shared dreams and modest hopes. But now those stories felt like fiction. She had created a beautiful life with Carlos, but she had built it on a foundation that could not support the weight of truth. For the first time since her business empire began, Maria wondered if all the money in the world was worth the price she had paid for keeping it secret. 6 months passed before Carlos and Maria spoke again beyond brief text messages about practical matters. During that time, Maria had made dramatic changes to her life, driven by a desperate hope that she could somehow prove her love was genuine and rebuild the trust she had destroyed. She had stepped down as CEO of her main company, though she retained ownership. The taco cart, surprisingly, remained her daily routine. Even without the need for deception, she found herself returning to that corner each morning, serving the customers who had become genuinely important to her. Mrs. Patterson still ordered the same lunch, Tommy still stopped by after school, and the construction workers still appreciated her food and friendly conversation. The difference was that now she operated the cart as herself, without the weight of maintaining a false identity. She had also hired 2 employees and expanded to a small food truck, creating real jobs and contributing authentically to her community. The business was profitable enough to support itself, which gave Maria a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with her wealth. On a rainy Thursday morning, as Maria was preparing for the lunch rush, she saw a familiar figure approaching through the drizzle. Carlos walked slowly, still favoring his left side from the injuries that had changed everything between them. He looked older, more serious, but also somehow more settled than she remembered. "Hello, Maria," he said quietly, standing a careful distance from her cart. "Hello, Carlos." Her hands trembled as she continued chopping onions, using the familiar work to steady her nerves. "How are you feeling? Are you back to work?" "I am better, still not 100%, but improving. I have been working part-time, doing lighter projects." He paused and looked around the busy street corner. "I heard you kept the cart." "Yes. It turns out I actually enjoy this work. The people, the routine, the satisfaction of providing something good for my community. It was not just part of the pretense." Carlos nodded slowly. "My brother said you hired his neighbor's daughter to help you. Rosa says you pay her well and treat her with respect." "Rosa is a hard worker. She reminds me of myself when I was starting out, before everything became so complicated." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of Maria's food preparation. Finally, Carlos spoke again. "I have been thinking about what you said, about not knowing who you really are anymore." "And what? Did you conclude?" "That maybe I do not know who I really am either. For years I defined myself as a man who could provide for his wife through honest work. When I learned that you did not actually need my financial support, I felt like my identity had been stolen from me." Maria stopped cutting vegetables and looked at him directly. "Your identity was never dependent on my financial situation, Carlos. You are a skilled craftsman, a loyal friend, a man of integrity. None of that changes because your wife has money." "I know that now," Carlos said, "but it took me months to separate my worth as a person from my role as a provider. I had to learn that my value comes from who I am, not from what I can give you." "I should have trusted you to understand that from the beginning," Maria said. "I should have believed that your love was strong enough to survive the truth." Carlos stepped closer to the cart, and Maria noticed he was carrying a small, wrapped package. "I brought you something," he said, setting it on her counter. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Maria unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a small wooden cutting board that Carlos had clearly made by hand. It was beautiful work, smooth and perfectly proportioned, with their initials carved discreetly in one corner. "You made this?" she asked, running her fingers over the polished surface. "I started woodworking while I was recovering. It helps me think, and it gives me something to create with my hands that is entirely my own." Carlos watched her examine his gift. "I wanted to make something for the woman who serves food to our community every day, whether she needs the money or not." Tears filled Maria's eyes as she understood the deeper meaning of his words. He was acknowledging both versions of her identity and accepting that they could coexist. "Carlos, I need you to know that I understand why you could not forgive me immediately. I violated your trust in the deepest possible way, and I do not expect you to simply forget that, because I am sorry." "I have not forgotten," Carlos said, "but I have learned something important about myself during these months apart. I fell in love with you because of your kindness, your humor, your strength, and your capacity to care about other people. Those qualities were real, Maria. The money did not create them or take them away." "So where does that leave us?" Maria asked, hardly daring to hope. "I think it leaves us with a choice. We can let your deception destroy what we built together, or we can try to build something new based on complete honesty. No more secrets, no more lies, no more protecting each other from difficult truths." Maria nodded eagerly. "Complete honesty? I want that more than anything. Even if honesty is sometimes uncomfortable, even if it means I might struggle with your wealth or feel intimidated by your success. Especially then, Maria said. I would rather work through real problems than live with beautiful lies. Carlos smiled for the first time since his accident, and Maria felt her heart leap with recognition of the man she had fallen in love with. In that case, I have a confession to make. I knew about your money 3 weeks before the accident. Maria stared at him in shock. You knew? How? I saw that newspaper article at your cart. Then I started paying attention to things that had not made sense before. The phone calls, the expensive phone you thought I had not noticed, the way you sometimes seem to know more about business than a taco vendor should. Why did you not say anything? Carlos looked embarrassed. Because I was a coward. I was afraid that confronting you would end our marriage, so I decided to pretend I did not know. I was planning to figure out how to bring it up gradually, maybe give you a chance to tell me yourself. Maria laughed, despite everything. So we were both living lies during those final weeks. Yes, and we were both miserable because of it. What? Changed your mind about telling me? The accident made me realize that life is too short and too fragile for deception. When I thought I might die, the only thing I regretted was that we had not been completely honest with each other. Maria reached across the counter and took Carlos's hand, feeling the familiar calluses that spoke of his dedication to his craft. So what do we do now? How do we build an honest marriage? We start by talking about everything, your business, my work, our dreams for the future, our fears about money and success, and whether we can really make this work. And we accept that it will be difficult sometimes, Maria added. That we will have arguments and misunderstandings as we learn to be our real selves with each other, and we remember why we fell in love in the first place, Carlos said, squeezing her hand. Not because our lives were simple, but because our connection was genuine. As the lunch crowd began to gather around Maria's cart, Carlos stepped back to let her work. But before he left, he said, Maria, would you like to have dinner tonight? At our apartment, I mean. If you want to come home. I would like that very much, Maria said, her smile brighter than it had been in months. Good. I will cook. Something simple, because that is who I am. And you can tell me about your day serving tacos, because that is who you are too. As Carlos walked away, Maria understood that they had found something more valuable than either simplicity or wealth. They had discovered that love could survive the truth, and that authenticity was worth any amount of struggle to achieve. The taco cart continued to serve its corner of the world, but now it represented something deeper than deception, or even honest work. It had become a symbol of two people choosing to build their lives on truth, one shared meal at a time.